Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here today. I appreciate you all coming. And I'd like to share with you a perspective that has come from our work in neuroscience. I'm a neuroscientist by training and a psychologist, and I've been interested in a fundamental question for my entire career, which is, if you look around and reflect on the people that you know, the diversity among people in how they respond to life's slings and arrows is striking. Some people are very resilient in response to adversity, and other people are much more vulnerable. Those variations among people have captivated me, and I've been interested in those questions for my entire career. And I've been studying the brain mechanisms that underlie these variations. And then something happened to me in 1992 which changed the course of my career and also deeply affected me personally in my personal life. I was invited by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to come meet with him at his residence in Dharamsala, India. And the Dalai Lama was very interested in encouraging serious neuroscientific research on the brains of individuals who spent years cultivating well-being, cultivating qualities of the mind which promote resilience, promote positive outlook. And he was interested to see if any of our tools of modern neuroscience might reveal something interesting about the brains of these individuals. And he challenged me on that day. Up until that point, much of our work was focused on adversity, on the negative side of life, on how adversity shapes the brain. And he challenged me and he said, "You've been using tools of modern neuroscience to study depression and anxiety and fear. Why can't you use those same tools to study kindness and compassion?" And it was really a wake-up call for me, and I did not have a very good answer. I said it was hard, but that was deeply unsatisfying. And I shifted the course of the work that we were doing in our lab, in our center, and began to orient toward this subject of well-being from that day on. Now, the title of this talk really conveys the central message, and that is that well-being should be regarded fundamentally as something no different than learning to play golf, learning to play chess, or learning to play the violin. If we practice at it, we will get better. And all of the research that we and other colleagues have done leads us inevitably to this conclusion. And the rest of the talk will really be a footnote to this central statement that well-being is a skill. Now, I'd like to share with you a little bit about why there is such increased receptivity to this work in modern science. But before I do that, let me just share with you an inspirational, that'll come later, an inspirational picture. I'll share with you that soon. But let me talk about 4 themes in modern science that are enabling this work to go forward in a way that is different than it was even 5 years ago. The first theme is neuroplasticity. Our brains are built to change in response to experience. And our brains are being shaped wittingly or unwittingly. Most of the time, our brains are being shaped unwittingly by the forces around us. And the invitation in this work is that we can all take responsibility for our brains, and we can shape them in ways that are more beneficial and more positive. The second theme is the equivalent of neuroplasticity in the realm of genomics, and that is the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is the science of how genes are regulated. And you can think of each gene as having a little volume control that goes from low to high. And the extent to which a gene is expressed, the extent to which that volume control is turned up or turned down, is influenced by our environments. We know from hard-nosed neuroscientific research that the way a mother interacts with her offspring, the extent to which the mother is nurturant and expresses loving qualities to her offspring, will induce epigenetic changes in the offspring. Those epigenetic changes can persist for a long duration of time. They can persist for the entire life of the organism, and they can even, we now know from hard-nosed neuroscientific and biological research, they can be passed down to at least 2 or 3 generations. Now, this was regarded as heresy, as Lamarckian, as science fiction just a few years ago, and these are now non-controversial, hard-nosed scientific facts. What is less clear is the extent to which our attitudes, our emotions, our demeanor can influence the expression of our genes. But we just published a paper last year showing that 1 day of intensive meditation practice among experienced meditators actually induced a measurable change in gene expression over the course of 8 hours. And so there's a lot more plasticity in these systems than we previously considered. The third theme is a theme that I talk about as bidirectional communication between the brain and the body. The systems in the brain that support our well-being are intimately connected to different organ systems in our body and also connected to the immune and the endocrine systems in ways that matter for our health. This is why there's a lot of evidence to suggest that in many chronic illnesses, psychosocial factors, particularly psychosocial stress, can exacerbate the symptoms of those illnesses. Well, if psychosocial stress can actually have an impact on those illnesses, the psychosocial stress is being transduced by the brain, and the brain is then in turn influencing the body in ways that are health relevant. And also, there's the flip side. This connection is bidirectional. If we change our bodies in some way, either through physical exercise or through other body-oriented kinds of practices, that actually feeds back to the brain and can have effects on modulating brain function in ways that are potentially consequential and also can be potentially deleterious. We know that if we're sick, if we have a virus in our body, we experience a kind of fuzziness in our mental quality, which is because of the connection from the body to the brain, which in this case is a deleterious influence, but the influences are constantly going back and forth in each direction. The fourth theme is probably the most controversial among these themes, but one that I think is particularly important and has so many profound implications. And the fourth theme is the theme of innate basic goodness. Innate basic goodness. I would like to invite the suggestion that we all, humans, come into the world with an innate predisposition for basic goodness. And what I mean by that is that if an organism is given a preference for a cooperative and altruistic encounter compared to one that is selfish and aggressive, the preference is clear. The preference is for what is altruistic and more warm-hearted. There is now a plethora of findings in very young infants showing that if you expose infants to scenarios that are appropriate for that age, either videotapes or puppets interacting, where there's a warm-hearted interaction compared to a selfish interaction, the infants show a clear preference for the interaction that is more altruistic, that is reflecting this kind of innate basic goodness. And I should say that recent evidence suggests that this is probably not restricted to humans either. There are a number of non-human primates which also show this same preference. It's not to say that the negative stuff doesn't exist. It's simply to say that if we are given a choice, the choice is clear, the choice is for what is pro-social and warm-hearted. And the reason why this is important is it leads us to conceptualize characteristics like compassion as something very much like language. We are all born with an innate propensity for language. And we know from scientific research that has studied individuals who, for example, are raised in the wild, feral children, who do not have a normal linguistic environment, that this propensity is not normally expressed. And in the same way, I think we can think about this for compassion. We are all born with an innate capacity for compassion, but that capacity requires nurturance in the same way that language requires nurturance in order to fully express the potential. And so the kind of simple mental practices that we've been studying are mental practices designed to nurture these innate qualities, strengthen them, consolidate them so that they are more pronounced. But they're not creating these qualities de novo. So this is the inspirational picture. This picture was taken in 2001. It was the first time the Dalai Lama visited our lab in Madison, Wisconsin. He has been there many times and actually will be coming again this April. And he has been an extraordinary inspiration for this work. And one of the things that the Dalai Lama said recently is that his two major commitments for the rest of his life are, one is working on behalf of the Tibetan people, and the second is meeting with scientists. May other religious leaders have such commitments. Okay. So I'd like now to talk explicitly about well-being. In 2015, in April, the United Nations World Happiness Report was released, which surveys indicators of happiness across the planet. And for the first time, the three economists who've been primarily responsible for writing this report, for reasons that I don't fully understand, decided to ask me as a neuroscientist to collaborate with them on the World Happiness Report. And so for the first time, there is a neuroscience section in the World Happiness Report. And what I'm about to describe to you actually is the key elements that are contained in this 2015 World Happiness Report. And it describes four constituents of well-being that are neuroscientifically validated, if you will, or that have been extensively studied in the neuroscience laboratory. These are, we can think of these as building blocks of well-being, the elements of well-being. And as you'll see, not all of them would be completely obvious. They certainly, we don't have questionnaires that measure these. And I would contend you can't measure these simply with a questionnaire. They require other ways of measuring them. So let me tell you what each is. I'll describe a little bit about each, and then I'll give you a feel for how we actually measure this in the laboratory. So the first is resilience. And what I mean by resilience is something very particular. Resilience, in this case, is the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. The rapidity with which we recover from adversity. Some people recover really quickly, and other people recover much more slowly. We can measure this in the brain. And it turns out that these circuits in the brain are plastic. We actually can influence the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that those individuals who recover more quickly from adversity, it doesn't mean they don't respond appropriately to adversity. They do. They can show a big response. But then they come back down to baseline very quickly, and that is a very adaptive response. And I'll share with you in a few minutes how we can actually measure that. The second element of a neuroscientifically base constituent of well-being, in many ways is the flip side of resilience. And in the book that I wrote called The Emotional Life of Your Brain, I talk about these different emotional styles. The second one is called outlook. And outlook refers to savoring of positive experiences, the extent to which positive emotions last. So we know that when a positive episode occurs, there are some people who experience an appropriate response, but it's very fleeting, and they cannot sustain that positive emotion. And in fact, one of the things that we discovered is that people who suffer from major depression, when they're presented with certain kinds of positive incentives, the brain responds quite normally in that instant, but it cannot sustain that response over time. And individuals who show high levels of well-being are able to sustain that response over time. And we can actually measure that in specific brain systems. And again, these brain systems are plastic, and there are specific mental exercises that we could do that will actually increase a person's capacity for this kind of positive savoring or outlook. The third constituent is attention. Now, this may seem like an odd constituent of well-being. Well, a paper was published a number of years ago in a major scientific journal by some friends of mine at Harvard who used smartphones to sample people out in the real world by texting them. And you can collect data from thousands of people in this way. And this was done in the United States, so this is representative of an adult population in the United States. And they essentially asked people three questions. The first question is, what are you doing right now? And so people had to just select from a list of activities to indicate what they were doing right now. Second question was, where is your mind right now? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused elsewhere? And the third question is, right now, how happy or unhappy are you right at this moment? And here's what they found. The average American adult spends 47% of her or his waking life not paying attention to what they're doing. 47% of the time. Folks, I'm confident that we can do better. There are very simple kinds of exercises that we can do to strengthen our attention muscle. But here's something even more telling. On the third question, when they asked people how happy or unhappy are you, when people reported that their minds were wandering, they reported themselves to be chronically less happy, more dysphoric than when they were paying attention to what they're doing, even if they were paying attention to something boring. Divided attention, distraction, is toxic for well-being. And these data are among a whole corpus of evidence that is robustly showing this. And so mindfulness, paying attention in the present moment, is a very important constituent of well-being. And there's now a growing body of scientific evidence to indicate that the circuits in the brain that underlie this are indeed plastic and can be shaped through training. The fourth constituent of well-being is generosity. The best way to activate positive emotion circuits in the brain is through generosity. And this is really a kind of exciting neuroscientific finding because there are pearls of wisdom in the contemplative traditions. The Dalai Lama frequently talks about this, that the best way for us to be happy is to be generous to others. And in fact, the scientific evidence is in many ways bearing this out and showing that there are systematic changes in the brain that are associated with acts of generosity. So let me, in the next few minutes, just share a little bit about how we can measure some of these things. I may skip around to show you the range of this. So the first place we began soon after I met the Dalai Lama, because of his strong request that compassion be studied scientifically, is to bring these long-term meditation practitioners into our laboratory who have been practicing simple mental exercises designed to strengthen their compassion. So that's what we did. And what we did is something really simple. We had them alternate, that's just what this is indicating, between a neutral state and a meditation state. Just a few minutes meditation and then a few minutes in neutral state. They just alternate back and forth to see what changes are occurring in the brain. And here's what one of the practitioners reported that they were doing when they were being measured. He said, what we've tried to do for the sake of the experiment is to generate a state in which love and compassion permeate the whole mind with no other consideration, reasoning, or discursive thoughts. And this is a practice that they do very regularly, and I frequently suggest to people, try this at home, but don't be frustrated if you find that it's difficult to do without reasoning or discursive thoughts intruding. Because after all, that is really the nature of our minds. But one of the virtues of working with these very long-term practitioners, who, by the way, have an average of approximately 34,000 hours of lifetime practice, so you can do the arithmetic at home, 34,000 hours is a lot of practice, and these are clearly not representative of the general public. But we decided to start there because if we didn't see signals in the brain that were associated with this in these individuals, we weren't going to see them in much less well-trained individuals. Okay, so this is a picture of one of our participants. This actually is a very famous Tibetan monk by the name of Mingyur Rinpoche, who has written several popular books on meditation, including a book called The Joy of Living. And here we're recording brain electrical signals from his head. And when we did this on him and a number of other people, we noticed something remarkable. And this is actually a slide from the very first paper that we published on these data that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Very prestigious scientific journal. It was the very first time in the august history of this journal that a paper on meditation had ever appeared. And on the left is the neutral state, on the right is the meditation state, and what was really amazing is that you don't need any fancy computer algorithms to see that there's a difference. What we see is the presence of these high amplitude gamma oscillations in the brain, which are indicative of plasticity, as well as connectivity among different regions of the brain that are present when they do this. We also put people in the MRI scanner, and this is a picture of Mathieu Ricard, who is one of the other practitioners that we studied. Mathieu is an amazing guy. We talked a little bit about him in our session last night on empathy and compassion. He's been a Tibetan Buddhist monk since 1967. He also has a PhD in molecular biology from the Pasteur Institute, where he worked with Francois Jacob, the Nobel laureate. And so he comes to the table with remarkable credentials. And in this picture, we took this picture after he'd been in the scanner for more than 3 hours. Most people don't look like this after 3 hours. And we see all kinds of interesting differences in their brains. And I won't go through the details here, but suffice it to say that the region that I'm highlighting in this slide is a really interesting region in the brain called the anterior insula. You know, neuroscientists, all neuroscientists, if you ask any neuroscientist, what's your favorite part of the brain, every neuroscientist will have their favorite part of the brain or their top three. This is in my top three. And the reason why it's in my top three is because this is there's something unique about this region of the brain. It's the only part of the brain that contains a topographic map of the visceral organs in our body. And so it literally is the place through which a lot of mind-brain-body interaction actually transpires. And compassion is a kind of state that involves the body in a major way, and it's not surprising that we see this area of the brain activated when the practitioners are generating compassion. Now, I just want to very briefly suggest that all this stuff is not just true in these rarefied long-term practitioners. This is from a study that was published a couple of years ago in individuals who've never done any of these kind of practices before, never meditated a minute in their life. And they were randomly assigned to one of two groups, one group where they learned a simple compassion meditation exercise similar to what I've described, and another group where they were taught cognitive reappraisal training from cognitive therapy, one of the most empirically well-validated strategies for cultivating well-being. And I don't have time to go through all of this, but what we find when we do this is that after just 2 weeks of training for 30 minutes a day, and they practice over the internet, they log on to a protected website and they get guided instructions there. And I should also tell you that you can download these guided instructions for free from our website, and I'll give you our website at the end of this talk. So they practiced for a total of 7 hours, 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. And we see systematic changes in the brain after just 7 hours of practice. And we also see changes in behavior. So I'm going to skip the elements of compassion training in the interests of time, but just show you that after 2 weeks of training, if you compare the compassion group to the reappraisal group on economic decision-making measures that reflect pro-social or altruistic behavior, what we see is that after 2 weeks of training, these are randomly assigned to each group. The participants in the compassion group behave in a more pro-social direction. So I want to just tell you a little bit more about resilience, and then I will just share with you a couple of ways in which we've extended this work to children. So I've talked about resilience as the rapidity of recovery from negative events. And you can think of recovery in this way. What I've drawn here is a hypothetical graph that illustrates how one person responds to adversity. And imagine that at the time point 3, some stressful event occurs, and this curve is drawn to depict their recovery. And we can compare this person to a second person who reaches the same amplitude of their response, but they recover more quickly. We can actually measure this in different neural circuits. And it turns out that simple practices of mindfulness meditation actually change the profile of recovery and enable a person to recover more quickly from a negative or stressful experience. So again, this mechanism of resilience is extraordinarily important. And when it's accumulated over time, if you have a difficulty recovering and it repeats day in and day out, it will have a toxic effect on certain peripheral biological systems which have consequences for our health. Okay, so I'm going to just say a couple of other words about how the connections between the mind and the brain and body impact our peripheral biology. In one experiment that we did, we randomized employees at a high-tech corporation to a simple program of 2 months of mindfulness meditation, and we had a control group who was going to receive the same instructions at a later point in time. And after the 2 months, each group was given a flu shot. And we measured the antibody titers mounted in response to the vaccine. This tells us how effective the flu shot actually is. And what we see is that after just 2 months, going to 1 class a week for 2 months, the participants in the meditation group actually show a bigger boost in their immune response to the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine is actually more effective for these participants. So this stuff doesn't just affect our subjective experience, but it also impacts our body in very specific ways. And we're extending this work in all kinds of interesting ways to inflammation and to genes that control inflammation, and finding that even short amounts of practice can bring benefit in these biological systems. Okay, so I'm going to just skip now to some of the extensions of this work to preschool kids. We have been interested in seeing whether we can actually teach some of these simple skills to very young children, because if we can teach them to really young children, we can perhaps help children to begin life on a more positive trajectory, and if that accumulates over time, these can have multiplicative effects. And so we've developed a kindness curriculum for preschool kids that we're implementing in public schools, and we're doing randomized controlled trials of this. We just published the first major scientific paper reporting the initial findings from the kindness curriculum. And these are some of the activities and topics that are covered in the kindness curriculum. And it's a curriculum that's taught either as an 8-week or a 12-week curriculum. And what we have found is that kids actually engage in more pro-social behavior after going through the kindness curriculum. They also show gains on measures that reflect attention and their ability to regulate their own behavior, to delay gratification. And we know that a child's ability to delay his or her gratification at age 4 and 5 is a very strong predictor of major life outcomes when they're in their 30s. And these measures of delay of gratification, of attention, and emotion regulation are measures that trump IQ, they trump standardized test scores, and they trump grade point average in predicting things like the likelihood of substance abuse when an individual is in his or her 30s, the engagement in antisocial behavior, criminal convictions, and financial success. All of these things have been studied carefully and documented in recent research. And this leads to the suggestion that if we can make a difference early in life, we can have enormous consequences for development later in life. So I'm going to just end by sharing one other thing, and then we'll have time for questions. And that is, we're trying to think out of the box about a lot of this stuff. And we are interested in harnessing technology if it can be used to help cultivate these kind of pro-social, positive habits of mind. And so with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we've been developing video games to train kids to cultivate habits of mindfulness and also kindness and pro-social behavior. And we have been testing these games in rigorous randomized controlled trials in a way that you would test a new pharmaceutical. And so we're randomly assigning groups of middle school kids, and we're sending them home with iPads. They play the game for several weeks. We test them before they start, actually in the MRI scanner, and then we bring them back after several weeks of game playing. And we're actually looking to see how these games are changing their brain and changing their behavior. So we've tested this in hundreds of children now. We've even had monks give us advice about these games. Let me just share with you a little trailer from the pro-social game that we've developed, and it will give you a feel for what it is we're doing.
When sentient life is detected on the distant planet Kador, a spacecraft
So this is targeted for 8th grade children.
To investigate. Their primary mission will be to study the alien culture through the interpretation of basic emotions. Leaving behind its own solar system, the spacecraft begins its long journey to the planet Kador.
So these faces are animated in anatomically realistic ways. And the child slides a finger on an iPad to rate the intensity of the emotions that are displayed. And the kids get rewarded for being generous and cooperative. Coming to your app store soon, quite seriously. So let me just I'm going to leave 15 minutes for questions. I want to just show you one other video which will give you a feel for our kindness curriculum, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for questions. So this is from a documentary film called Free the Mind, which is a film that's been made about some of the work in our center, and it focuses on the implementation of the kindness curriculum. And as you'll see, it focuses on one particular boy who just happened to be in the class at this time, and we can talk more about it at the end. But this will give you a really good feel for how we implement this in the classroom.
Charity to the other stairs. You must want to come with us. Okay, wait right here for Charity, and we'll meet you at the next floor, okay?
We have elevators, right? I know that you didn't have a good time in one of them, but your mom and dad weren't in there with you, right? How about you and I will take the elevator one time, and then listen, take a deep breath. It's okay. It's okay. Do you need a hug?
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
There's 2 bathrooms open for you. 1, 2.
We're gonna do the elevator.
There are different parts of the brain that become active when we have feelings of sadness and feelings of frustration and feelings of happiness. And we can change our brains for the better.
Breathing in and exhaling, dropping the trunks down and going.
The challenge for us and Will, the doctor that we met with, he recommended medication for Will. It was
clearly ADHD, and he was recommending Ritalin.
and for us to put a 3-year-old or 4-year-old on Ritalin was not the path we wanted to go on, and we're looking at alternative ways for him to bridge his development to get beyond the need for that.
Now we're going to watch our breathing.
Social emotional learning is teaching kids how to be more emotionally intelligent. So teaching kids to take the perspective of others before they act, and being more self-aware, knowing what their emotions are.
So developing sort of empathy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was mine. She gave it to me.
What happened, buddy?
Does it feel tight in here? Yeah, put your hand. Show me with your hand how it feels inside. Where does it hurt? Where does it feel tight? Right there? And in your throat. Okay, watch me. Put your hand on your belly and take in a breath with me. You ready? Blow it out. Go ahead, tell him how you're feeling when you see him so sad. Sad? You feel sad too? Show me where in your body you feel sad.
Right here.
Right here you feel sad in your body. Doesn't feel so good, does it? When you pay attention, what happens to your body? Does it get all busy?
No.
No, what happens to your body when you're paying attention? Quiet. It gets slow. You can pay attention on the outside and you can pay attention on the inside. So the first thing we're gonna do today is pay attention on the inside. Is everybody ready? This is for you. It's very cool, isn't it? Shake it up really hard, like as if you were really mad or really angry. Now, this jar is like your mind when you're angry and upset. And then we see the angry thoughts settling down.
We can actually be happier people. We can suffer less if we take responsibility for our own mind.
Well, I heard that when you go by elevators, they get you really, really angry or really upset. Is that true? How does it feel on the inside when that's happening?
Scared.
It feels scared? I'm wondering if we could walk over by the elevator together. Is that okay?
Do what?
And then shake this up when you start feeling scared on the inside. Is that okay? Great. Here, you carry it. Okay, we're getting close to the elevator. How does it feel in your body?
I'm good.
It does? So I'm wondering, maybe another day, could we take that mind jar with us and take a ride on the elevator? Another day or today?
Another day.
All right. What do you think about that mind jar?
Good.
Do you think that we should leave it at school so that if you're feeling angry or upset, that you could maybe shake it?
It's brainwashing for a good cause.
No, I wouldn't say that, because brainwashing usually implies that the person who is being brainwashed is not agreeing to this process.
Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out.
How about today, you can choose one friend and we'll all go to the elevator together. You can bring your snow globe. We can go inside
And do what?
and take a look at the elevator. And if you want to ride, we can. If you're not ready, then we won't go up.
I'll try it. I'll try to ride.
You will? All right, my friend.
Can I hold your hand in the elevator?
Oh, of course you can.
Well, I'm a little bit scared.
Okay. And remember, what does the snow globe do for you?
Make me cool.
Yeah.
Oh, we're sorry.
Of course. And if you feel worried, what can you do with the snow globe?
Shake it.
Shake it up. Yep.
Why?
Okay, now watch this. How does your mind and your body feel right now?
Calm.
Good.
I'll give you a lot of power. I'll give you all the power I got.
Thank you very much. And I just want to end by sharing with you a quote from Albert Einstein, who wrote this in a letter to a friend who was asking for some advice about a daughter who was experiencing some difficulty. And Einstein in 1921 said, A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please. Microphones are coming around. Mic's coming.
Have you thought about or been able to apply this to children who have Asperger's?
So the question is about children with Asperger's. We've done a lot of basic research on children with Asperger's and kids with autism. We have not done any systematic work yet on the application of these methods, but we're doing it now. We're involved in a study now using some simple breathing practices with kids on the autism spectrum. We're evaluating the impact of our game to cultivate the detection of nonverbal cues of emotion and prosocial behavior with kids on the autism spectrum. So this is work that's ongoing. Yes, please. Although I remember I'm supposed to ask people in clumps, so I'll do that next. Yes, please.
Have you done this work with prison population, those who are incarcerated?
Yeah, so in terms of prison population, there is work going on in the US that I'm aware of a little bit, mostly applied work, not really being done in a research context, but there is some work going on the application of these methods in prisons. There's a wonderful documentary film that's been made about a maximum security prison in the South where they have implemented some of these methods, and it's a very dramatic film about some of the changes that have been observed anecdotally. I think that this is a wonderful potential application for these methods, but it just hasn't been studied, particularly on hard-nosed measures like recidivism, which, of course, are the kinds of indices we'd like to see. Yeah. So let's, in this group, please. Mike's coming.
I have a real quick one. Where can we buy the mind jars?
We actually had the kids make them themselves, so there's nothing special about them. But having this as a concrete representation of their mind, it's just amazing how the kids just totally understood it instantaneously. And it turned out to be enormously helpful.
My question is, as an adult, like me, how do you start the process of meditation? What are the steps to take, and where can one do it?
Yeah, wonderful practical questions. First of all, plasticity never ends until we die, so that's the good news. It's never too late to learn. There are lots of resources available now on the web. There is an entity at NIH called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, and this is part of the National Institutes of Health. If you go onto their website, they have a whole section on meditation, and you can learn about resources that they recommend. At virtually every academic medical center in North America, an entity called mindfulness-based stress reduction is taught, MBSR. This was originally developed by John Kabat-Zinn of the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and I would highly recommend that program because it's been the most empirically well-validated of any kind of meditation out there. If any of you wish to try a compassion-based practice, you can go onto our website, which is investigatinghealthyminds.org. Let's see if I have a slide of it. If we can put up the slides once more, investigatinghealthyminds.org. You can go to that website and download the compassion meditation that we used in our research, and try it for yourselves and see how it works.
Thank you. I have a question. I think after looking at the game for kids, there is a next step, which is to influence the brain directly, chemically or electronically. Is that something you would consider, and how do you think about that?
It's a wonderful question. You know, we've talked about that with the Dalai Lama a little bit, and he said, if there's a way for us to stimulate his compassion center, he'd be the first to sign up. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon your perspective, as you might expect, the brain is really complicated. And if anyone tells you that they know what kind of stimulation to use or what kind of cocktail to give you, or where in the brain to tweak, I just think we're very far from that at this point. And I also think that these strategies are really simple. And we also know that practice is something extremely important, and practice leads to enduring change. And even if you're only practicing a few minutes a day, if you do it regularly, it can lead, we know from basic neuroscience research, to systematic changes in the connectivity of the brain, and can produce changes that really stick. So I am not sanguine about coming up with a simple solution that can expedite the process anytime soon. It's a very frequently encountered question, but I think there's no substitute for practice. Yes, please.
I have found meditation very helpful when I've had to be in MRIs. I almost virtually fall asleep, so it's very helpful. But they say that the human brain actually has its own pharmacy there. Have you ever worked on doing meditation and how to activate?
Well, in some of our work, we study the chemical changes that are produced by these practices, and absolutely, there are all kinds of endogenous molecules that are important in the brain that support well-being, but it's not just one molecule, it's many that interact in very complex ways. That's why there's no pill that we could take that would increase your compassion. It's a lot more complicated than that, but these practices certainly influence the chemical systems in very important ways. So that's going on all the time. And again, the invitation in this work is that we can actually produce more beneficial intentional changes in our brain with these really simple strategies. Yes, please.
That the brain is plastic. So does this mean that you need to maintain this practice to keep the brain in that format?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. You all know that if you go to a physical trainer and get really buffed up for several weeks, and if you stopped exercising, those changes would quickly dissipate. And it's very similar for this kind of practice. There was an article that was published in the New Yorker many years ago, and it's something that's really stuck with me. It profiled the lives of three people. One was Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist. The other was Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player. And the third was this guy named Ed Wilson, who's a very famous surgeon at UC San Francisco. And these are three people who are the best in the world at what they do. And it asked, what do these three people have in common? Practice, practice, practice. Yes, please.
You had the diagram up there of the monk's brain who had been in the MRI. Did you say that was the left temporal lobe? I missed
I didn't.
your favorite. Okay.
No, it was the insula.
I don't know that one. Okay, have you ever had anybody in these meditation practices have an epileptic seizure? Because there's so much happening in that part of the brain that as they go in there and they do everything, all of a sudden...
Never happened. We've tested by now thousands of people. It's never happened. There is an interesting literature that is scientific literature that's beginning to develop on meditation and epilepsy. Not so much that these practices can stimulate epilepsy, but actually can help people who are prone to epilepsy in normalizing certain abnormal brain rhythms. But that's at a very early stage. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Wonderful presentation. I'm looking at, can you comment on technologies which are out there today for biofeedback, like Interaxon, Muse, or Emotive, which really help people consumers get feedback on their meditation sessions, also brain entertainment like photoic stimulation, binaural beats. What's your comment on these techniques?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. You've listed quite a few. There are more. And I think that we need to evaluate this. I think that these are strategies which may be helpful. We don't really know at this point in time. I think that we can use some of these metrics as ways of providing feedback to people that where it's not used as neurofeedback or biofeedback itself, but we can monitor our progress, so to speak, in ways that can be reinforcing. It's kind of like a Fitbit for the mind. And I think that we can develop that, and some of our work is oriented toward doing that. So I think there is some potential, but I don't think anything out there yet has fully realized it in terms of hard-nosed research kind of criteria. Maybe we have time for one more question. One more question. Okay, in the back.
Thank you. Has there been any short-term and long-term studies on teens and preteens who play these very violent video games for hours?
The answer is yes. And the data are sobering. I often refer to these data very much like the data on the effects of smoking on health. We now, I think, have sufficient data to suggest that violent video games are really toxic. They produce increases in aggressive and antisocial behavior. There is a plethora of evidence for this. A couple of years ago, I co-organized a meeting at the White House at the invitation of President Obama's science advisor, and it was a meeting on games, well-being, and neuroscience. And we brought 20 of the top executives in the gaming industry. There are about 20 government and foundation officials and about 20 scientists. And one of the goals of this meeting was to have the scientific presentations on the impact of violent video games and have the executives actually have to sit there and listen and hear what the evidence is. And the invitation in this meeting to those gaming executives was that we believe it's actually possible to build a game which kids will want to play that does not involve shooting other people. And I think it is possible, and I think we have a moral obligation to try. And that's what has led to our work with games. I think that there is a lot of potential in using games as a medium for pro-social purposes. So thank you all very much.